This is a moment in Jewish history. Warder Cresson was the first American consul to Jerusalem. It was a position he held for a little over a week. You see, Warder Cresson was accused of being an unstable Christian missionary. He did go through several religious phases, but once he settled in Jerusalem, Warder Cresson settled on Judaism. After his conversion, he faced trial for insanity, which he successfully defended, proving that converting to Judaism does not make one crazy. In his autobiographical book, The Key of David, published in 1852, Cresson argues for Judaism and advocates for Jewish people to be repatriated to the land of Israel and build agricultural communities. The introduction to his book reads as follows. In the spring of 1844, I left everything near and dear to me on earth. I left the wife of my youth and 6 lovely children, dearer to me than my natural life, and an excellent farm, with everything comfortable around me. I left all these in pursuit of truth, and for the sake of truth alone. I had often from my youth asked my soul, where is perfect, incontestable truth to be found? The answer was, it exists everywhere. It is in the heart. It consists in the conscious evidence of her existence, against which no reasoning can prevail. Still, I was not satisfied. Warder Cresson was born in 1799 to a prominent Philadelphia Quaker family, one of 8 children. He was successful in agriculture, married and had several children. He purchased a large amount of farmland in the Philadelphia area. During this period of American history, there was a great amount of religious and political discourse. There was the controversy within the Quaker community, and Warder Cresson was one of the many Quakers who began debating religious beliefs. He published a pamphlet criticizing his religious leaders and debated with his fellow Quakers. By 1833, he had several more children and written several more religious pamphlets. While he had become estranged from his former Quaker community, his wife was intent on continuing her affiliation. It was this year that Cresson wrote The Jews and the Mosaic Law, which explains Judaism to both Jewish and Christian readers. In it, he wrote about, quote, the ultimate restoration of the Israelites and the ingathering of the captives. During this time, he befriended Isaac Leeser of Congregation Mikvah Israel, a prominent synagogue in Philadelphia, and he read Leeser's monthly periodical, The Occident. Later, when Cresson converted to Judaism, he wrote articles for it under his new name, Michael Boaz Israel. But before we get there, we must discuss the shortest ever appointment of an American consul abroad. This took place in 1844, when Warder Cresson successfully lobbied to become the first United States Consul to Jerusalem, which was then part of the Ottoman Empire. Congressman Edward Joy Morris, later American minister to Turkey, recommended Cresson. Cresson offered to serve as consul for no salary, and he used his personal fortune to pay for the trip. Barely a week later, Samuel D. Ingham of Pennsylvania, a former U.S. Secretary of the Treasury, wrote to Calhoun the following. His mania is of the religious species. He was born a Quaker and wanted to be a preacher. His passion is for religious controversy, and no doubt he expects to convert Jews and Mohammedans in the East. But in truth, he is withal a very weak-minded man in his mind. While Cresson was busy traveling to the land of Israel, he was removed from his position by the Secretary of State. Ironically, while he was suspected of being a Christian missionary, it was the presence of Christian missionaries in Jerusalem that greatly turned him off. He complains that in Jerusalem he found, quote, missionaries to the Holy Land with above enormous salaries, varying from 100 to 1,200 pounds sterling, not to convert, but to pervert the Jews, that is, to Gentilize them. But they have never succeeded in ever getting a single Jew born in Jerusalem to apostatize, but only a very few poor, miserable stragglers, and even these were only brought by having seen their English gold shining and tempting them through their sawdust. These missionaries, immediately upon their arrival in Jerusalem, hired the very best houses, bought the very best and most splendid Arabian horses, and dressed and lived in the most luxurious and stylish manner, according as their different salaries permitted them, unquote. Cresson spent 4 years in Jerusalem and in some capacity acted as an official consul until officials contacted him to officially inform him that he had been stripped of his duties. Among those that Cresson met in Jerusalem was the famous English novelist William Makepeace Thackeray, author of Vanity Fair and The Luck of Barry Lyndon. He described Cresson as a tradesman who made a considerable fortune and lived in a country house in comfortable retirement to witness the return of the Jews and the glorification of the restored Jerusalem. He sent and demanded an interview with the Pasha and explained to him the infallible return of the Jews to Palestine. Another famous author whom Cresson met in Jerusalem was Herman Melville, author of Moby Dick. He too was taken with the idea of the Jewish people becoming self-sufficient and self-governing in the land of Israel. However, once there, Herman Melville wrote in his journal, "The idea of making farmers of the Jews is in vain. In the first place, Judea is a desert with few exceptions. In the second place, the Jews hate farming. All who cultivate the soil in Palestine are Arabs. The Jews dare not live outside walled towns of villages for fear of the malicious persecution of Arabs and Turks. Besides, the number of Jews in Palestine is comparatively small. And how are the hosts of them scattered in other lands to be brought here? Only by a miracle." Ironically, Melville was proven wrong, and the Zionist movement, which had then just begun, created numerous farms and agricultural communities in the land of Israel. Some would interpret it as a miracle. Warder Cresson was one of those who initiated such a farm, but as we will find later, it never came to fruition. Yet Herman Melville still wrote his famous epic poem, Clarel, a poem and pilgrimage in the Holy Land. This was published in 1876, and many believe that the main character, an American farmer who converts to Judaism after moving to the Holy Land, is based on Warder Cresson. Warder Cresson marveled at the sights described in the Bible he now saw with his own eyes. He writes, quote, "I remained in Jerusalem in my former faith until the 28th day of March, 1848, when I became fully satisfied that I could never obtain strength and rest but by doing as Ruth did, and saying to her mother-in-law Naomi, 'Entreat me not to leave thee, for whither thou goest, I will go.' In short, I was circumcised, entered the Holy Covenant, and became a Jew." After 4 years in Jerusalem, Cresson returned to Philadelphia, eager to share his newfound faith with his wife and children. But his wife had become, as he put it, quote, "a rigid Episcopalian," unquote. He claimed that his wife's convictions were one of the great points upon which first commenced our difficulties. It forced him to choose between God or my wife. To this were added financial problems. His farm was sold, and $2,000 worth of his personal effects were disposed of. Cresson had given his wife power of attorney before leaving for Jerusalem, and now he found himself practically propertyless. Thus began the trial for lunacy in Philadelphia Court of Common Pleas. Warder Cresson's soon-to-be ex-wife and several members of his family said that he was a lunatic. Well-known lawyers represented both sides. Newspapers noted that a large number of his friends testified that they'd had dealings with him and always considered him of sane mind, and that his farm was well attended to. The following news articles were published during and after the trial. From the New York Times. The friends and family of Warder Cresson, Esquire, late consul at Jerusalem, are applying for a writ to shut him out of his possession for part of his property, on the ground of him being a lunatic for embracing Judaism. Mr. Cresson had a deed of trust for half his property, but was not so insane as to convey the other half, so they wish to obtain that under this writ. That a Christian court would decide that adopting Judaism as a religion would be proof of insanity, we can never believe. It would be an attack on the founder of Christianity himself. It would be incompatible with reason and common sense. We know the history of Mr. Cresson and believe him to be sincere in his new faith. If he is crazy on that account, what is to be the condition of the whole Gentile world at this promised time? We must be careful how we allow such writs of inquiry to undermine civil and religious rights of citizens. From the Philadelphia Herald. Warder Cresson was discharged on Monday by a jury's verdict from all imputation of insanity. This gentleman, it is now well known, has become a member of the Jewish persuasion. In 1844, he was appointed U.S. Consul at Jerusalem, where he proceeded, and amid the scenes of Palestine, he became a convert to that old and venerable faith, which was founded by Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and confirmed and established by the divine legation and miracles of Moses. Mr. Cresson returned to his country in 1848, and finding he could not conciliate his belief with that of his family, he generously divided his property with them by a deed of trust, and became an exile from all he held dear and loved. The sacrifice was great, but his conscience was supreme. He was soon after prosecuted by his family for lunacy, but the jury, after an important investigation of 6 days, liberated him from his thraldom, pronounced him sane and capable of conducting and managing his worldly affairs. This prosecution was an attempt to coerce conscience through the horrors of a lunatic asylum and deprive a man of his civil and religious liberty and throw an imputation on the Jewish faith. But the jury, with magnanimity, for they were all Christians, that does them high honor, vindicated the truth of the American rights and our Republican Constitution. Now that the charges were dismissed, Warder Cresson, now Michael Boaz Israel, returned to Jerusalem. There he married a Sephardic Jewish woman, Rachel Molino, with whom he had 2 children. He published in 1851 a pamphlet called The Great Restoration and Consolidation of Israel in Palestine, addressing it to the Jews of the House of Israel scattered throughout the United States of America, England, and all of Europe. He suggested the formation of a great American and foreign association for colonization and promoting the welfare of the interests of the Jewish people. He also had an idea to establish a large farm just outside Jerusalem in the valley of Rephaim, Emek Rephaim. Today, Emek Rephaim is a major street in Jerusalem. It continues all the way past Malcha Mall. You can see large tracts of empty land there today, in between the old train tracks, the mall, and the zoo. Perhaps this was the very area where Warder Cresson envisioned a farm. Warder Cresson died in 1860 and was buried on the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem. This has been a moment in Jewish history. For questions or comments and past shows, you can visit benbresky.substack.com. Thank you to all the listeners, and Shalom.